chosen ones. The day your frequency touched the air above Washington, D.C., the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Reports say no alarms were triggered, no sirens blared, yet every instrument in the control rooms began reading numbers they'd never seen before. It wasn't just data. It was as if the machines were speaking a language only a few could understand. The hum in the air felt alive, resonating not just through steel and stone, but through the marrow of those who stood in its reach. Witnesses claimed the clouds over the Potomac slowed, bending slightly as though listening. Somewhere inside the Oval Office, the president, midway through a classified briefing, paused mid-sentence. His aides saw the color drain from his face. The frequency wasn't heard, but it was felt, like the low roll of thunder before a storm, pressing on the soul. He placed both hands on the desk, staring at the floor, until suddenly he lowered himself to his knees. No one spoke. They knew something larger than power had entered the room. Security feeds would later show shadows shifting in the corners, though no one was physically there. Across the city, street lamps flickered in synchronized patterns, like Morse code from another realm. Some, who felt the pulse, dropped to their knees without knowing why, while others stood frozen, heartbeats syncing with a rhythm that was not their own. The Pentagon issued a silent lockdown. All communications were rerouted, encrypted, and archived under a clearance so high that even the vice president's access was denied. Yet among those who felt it, there was no mistaking its intent. It was a summons, not to war, but to awakening. In neighborhoods far from the capital, children began humming melodies they'd never learned, in perfect harmony with one another. An old man on the outskirts of Georgetown said he heard bells that hadn't rung in decades. The city's very foundations seemed to vibrate, as if remembering something ancient, something hidden. The room was suffocating with urgency as the president's advisors argued over the next course of action. Monitors flashed streams of encrypted data, the kind that only the most classified branches could interpret. Yet even those experts were at a loss. The numbers refused to stabilize. It wasn't an attack in any conventional sense. It was something they could neither block nor trace, a presence that moved through their networks without touching a single line of code. Then, as if compelled by an invisible hand, the president rose from his chair, his face unreadable. He stepped away from the table, the chaos still buzzing behind him, and moved toward the far corner of the room where no cameras were positioned. He knelt, not in defeat, but in reverence. His lips moved in a silent prayer, his eyes fixed not on the ground, but on some unseen horizon beyond the walls. Those closest to him said they felt a shift in the air, as if the very oxygen had become charged with meaning. The lights dimmed, but it was not a power failure. Something was drawing the focus away from human authority, toward a force ungoverned by law or protocol. Outside the briefing room, agents stood still, fingers twitching near their earpieces, waiting for orders that never came. Instead, an unspoken stillness spread like ripples across the building. Even the White House's most advanced systems slowed, as though respecting a moment they could not comprehend. The power grid remained functional, yet several devices blinked to standby, their indicators glowing faintly like votive candles in a hidden chapel. The president's prayer was not for strength or clarity. It was for restraint. There was a recognition that the wrong response could unravel not just political balance, but something far more delicate. Some say he heard a whisper in that moment, not through his ears, but through the weight on his spirit. It urged him to wait, to listen, to yield control to something greater than the sum of all nations combined. In the minutes that followed, no new orders were given. The chaos slowed to a quiet hum. Even the ticking of the clock seemed less insistent. Yet somewhere, in the layers of power that move unseen, this pause sent shockwaves. Those watching from afar knew this was not hesitation. It was the opening of a door they could not yet see, one that once entered could never be closed again. They say buildings cannot listen yet. The Capitol that day seemed alive, its marble pillars catching echoes that had no source, the kind of sound that is felt more than heard. Witnesses spoke of a low resonance threading through the air, weaving between the rotunda's columns and spilling into its hidden chambers. It was not speech, yet it carried the unmistakable weight of a name, and though none dared speak it aloud, each who heard it knew exactly who it belonged to. Security teams swept the halls, searching for transmitters or interference, but their instruments returned nothing. The frequency passed through concrete and steel, as if both were paper. No static, no distortion, only the steady pulse of something ancient and unyielding. The old murals that lined the upper walls seemed to shimmer in the dim light, shapes shifting subtly, as though revealing fragments of stories long buried. Beneath the dome, where so many oaths had been sworn, the resonance deepened, and with it came a silence that demanded attention. Among those in the chamber was a man who carried a small weathered Bible in his coat, a habit unnoticed by most. In the stillness he opened it, and his eyes fell on a verse as if guided not by choice, but by design. "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." The words were not a comfort, but a confirmation. The name the walls were carrying was not just a human identity. It was a calling, written in a frequency the soul could not refuse. Outside, tourists walked past the building, unaware of what stirred inside, but a few stopped mid-step, glancing at the dome with inexplicable unease. Birds that often circled above had vanished from the sky, leaving only the faint hum of wind that seemed to travel in patterns, not random but intentional. Deep beneath the Capitol, in secure vaults lined with lead and secrecy devices meant to detect seismic shifts, began to tick, though no tremor shook the earth. Those who remained inside found it harder to speak, as though the air itself was listening for something more important than their words. The name continued its silent passage through walls, corridors, and hearts, until even the most skeptical among them realized it was not leaving. It was waiting, poised for the moment when what was heard would become what must be answered. The briefing room was locked down, its heavy doors sealed with codes known to only a handful of people. Screens along the wall cycled through satellite feeds, radar sweeps, and scrolling lines of classified intelligence. Yet the attention in the room kept drifting to something else. A faint sound seemed to rise from nowhere. At first, mistaken for interference, but too deliberate, too patterned to be dismissed. It was soft, almost like a hymn, barely touching the edge of hearing. The longer it played, the more it wrapped itself around the minds of those present. Some tried to speak over it, their voices strained and uneven, while others found themselves pausing mid-sentence, as if forgetting why they had started talking at all. The sound carried a texture impossible to replicate on any known device, warm yet commanding, layered with tones that felt older than the room itself. A translator in the corner froze her hands still over her keyboard, her eyes glassing over as if she was reading words on the air, not the screen. She whispered, without realizing Psalm 24, "Lift up your heads. O gates, and be lifted up. O ancient doors that the King of Glory may come in. Amen. The president's chief of staff caught the phrase and turned sharply. But the woman's expression suggested she hadn't even known she spoke. No one could pinpoint the source of the sound. Every microphone, camera, and encrypted transmitter ran silent. Yet the psalm persisted, steady, unwavering, as if it had been waiting centuries for this exact space and moment. Across the table, a general known for his composure began tapping his finger, in slow rhythm, in perfect sync with the unseen melody. Each tap seemed to match a heartbeat not his own. The air felt heavier, yet not oppressive. Almost as if the room had expanded into something unseen. The very walls appeared to lean inward slightly, though the structure did not move. A faint scent, like burning incense, brushed through the air. Vents unexplainable, given the building's filtration systems. By the time the sound faded, the room had changed, not in appearance, but in atmosphere. Every person inside knew the meeting they had been called for was now irrelevant. The psalm had already spoken its message, though no one could fully explain what it demanded. Still, they could feel it waiting there in the silence, pressing on the threshold of their next breath. The Lincoln Bible sat in its glass case under careful climate control, an artifact brought out only for the most ceremonial occasions. Yet on that day, without any official order, it had been removed from its display and placed on a table in a secure archive room. No one could say exactly who moved it or why. The staff responsible for its preservation swore they had locked it away the night before. But when they arrived that morning, the book was there, waiting, as though it had chosen its own place. The pages were thick with the scent of age edges, darkened from the hands of history. An analyst assigned to catalog its condition noticed something odd in the spacing of certain words when viewed under infrared light. Letters, faintly marked as if by invisible ink, began to reveal themselves, not randomly but in deliberate sequences. The pattern was too structured to be decorative. Numbers appeared alongside the letters, forming coordinates, dates, and phrases in multiple languages. The deeper they searched, the more one sequence stood out. It aligned with a verse from the Gospel of John, written not in the printed text, but hidden between the fibers of the paper. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The analyst paused, his hands trembling over the delicate pages. He was not a man of faith yet. Something in the precision of its placement convinced him this was not the work of any archivist, but a message sealed there, long before they had the means to uncover it. When the findings were quietly delivered to a senior official, the reaction was not skepticism, but fear. The coordinates embedded within pointed to a location beneath the Capitol itself, a chamber listed in no architectural record. The president was informed only in passing without context, but the way his eyes fixed on the Bible suggested he understood more than he let on. The book was returned to its case without explanation, the hidden code unmentioned in any official report. Yet for those who had seen it, the words remained engraved in their memory. They felt less like a discovery and more like a reminder that some truths are planted in plain sight, waiting for the exact moment when they must rise to the surface again. The order came through a secure channel, its language clean and precise, instructing immediate action to contain what was now officially classified as a frequency anomaly. The directive was simple: isolate the source, neutralize the risk. The general read it twice. His jaw set, his eyes distant. He had followed orders, His entire career from battlefields where the air was thick with smoke to silent operations, buried so deep in secrecy they were erased from existence before dawn. But this was different. The language was the same, yet the intent felt wrong. He sat alone in his office, the blinds drawn, the hum of the ventilation, the only sound. He replayed the moment he first felt the anomaly, not through a device, but in his own bones. It had been like standing at the edge of a cliff with the wind pulling inward instead of out. There had been no fear, only clarity, a sense that something was calling not for compliance, but for recognition. He could not reconcile that with an order to treat it as a threat. When his aide returned for a signature, he shook his head and slid the file back across the desk. The aide hesitated, knowing refusal was not just a breach of protocol, but a direct challenge to the chain of command. Yet the general's voice was steady. "We stand down." He did not explain. He did not negotiate. The aide left pale-faced, already aware of the consequences that would follow. Hours later, the general received a secure message from an untraceable source. The words were brief. "Hold the line." His hands tightened around the phone as if the message had weight. He thought of the men and women under his command and knew the refusal would protect more than it endangered. In the silence of his office, he opened the top drawer of his desk, revealing a small weathered cross, its edges worn smooth from years of carrying. It was not regulation. It was not part of any issued equipment, but he kept it close. The order had been to contain, yet he felt his role was to witness, to wait for the moment when this presence would reveal not what it could take away, but what it had come to give. He leaned back in his chair, aware that the refusal had set something in motion, something that could no longer be undone. It began just after midnight, when the city was wrapped in its usual hum of distant traffic and quiet lights. A low vibration moved through the ground, steady like the heartbeat of something immense. It did not trigger alarms or register on seismic monitors, but those near the National Mall felt it in their feet and deep in their chests. The monuments stood silent, yet each seemed to respond in its own way. The Washington Monument's shadow stretched unnaturally far, as if pulled toward an unseen horizon. The Lincoln Memorial's columns gave off a faint ringing sound, like crystal struck softly. The air around the reflecting pool rippled, though no wind touched its surface. Tourists walking late stopped mid-step, their conversations falling away. Phones froze their screens, flickering with static before going black. One man said later, "It felt as though the ground itself had taken a breath and was holding it. Even the moonlight seemed altered, pooling brighter on certain stones as if drawing lines across the mall." Near the Jefferson Memorial, a maintenance worker reported hearing whispers echoing off the curved walls, though he stood alone. He couldn't make out the words at first, until a phrase came through, clear enough to make him step back. "Be not afraid, for I am with you." It was not shouted, but carried, in a tone that felt like it bypassed his ears and settled directly into his thoughts. The sound carried a weight of certainty that no doubt could erode. Across the Potomac, the pulse reached Arlington, its rhythm unbroken. Soldiers on overnight guard detail shifted uneasily, some glancing at each other without speaking. The eternal flame at the Kennedy gravesite flared higher for just a moment, a detail dismissed in official reports, but remembered in quiet retellings. By dawn, the pulse faded, yet those who felt it knew it had not left. It was not an event, but a presence still woven into the city's foundations. The monuments were unchanged to the eye, but to those who had stood in their shadow. During those hours, something was different. The stone no longer felt entirely still, and the spaces between its grains seemed to carry a waiting tension, as though they were listening for the next time the heartbeat would return. The seal had been in place for decades, embedded into the marble floor of a restricted chamber beneath the Capitol. It was a perfect circle, engraved with an emblem few had ever seen, and fewer still could name. The room was windowless, lit only by recessed lamps that hummed softly against the stillness. That night, the light was different. Moonlight reached the chamber, though there was no opening for it to pass through. It spilled across the seal with a cold silver glow, tracing every carved line until the emblem seemed to breathe. A guard stationed at the entrance felt the temperature drop. His radio crackled with static, then fell silent. He stepped inside and froze. The seal was moving, not with a shift of stone, but with a separation so fine it could barely be seen. Lines that had been part of the design now split apart, forming a pattern not recorded in any blueprint. From the widening space, a faint sound emerged, a low harmonic tone, like the resonance of a struck bell drawn out for eternity. The air thickened, and the guard felt his knees weaken. He gripped the wall for balance, his eyes fixed on the center, where the marble seemed almost fluid. Beneath the surface, shadows shifted in slow, deliberate movements, too defined to be tricks of light. The tone deepened, and his mind filled with an image he could not explain. A horizon of endless light, a figure walking toward it. Not hurried, yet unstoppable. The figure carried no weapon, yet its presence carried the weight of judgment and mercy in equal measure. His pulse matched the rhythm of the tone, until he could no longer tell if it was his heart or something older keeping time. Suddenly, the sound stopped. The lines in the seal slid back into place. As though nothing had happened, the moonlight faded, and the room returned to its artificial glow. The guard's radio clicked alive again, carrying a single burst of static before returning to normal. He did not report what he saw. The chamber was locked and sealed once more, but he avoided its threshold from that night forward. The emblem remained the same to all others, but to him, it was no longer a symbol carved in stone. It was a door, and doors are meant to open again. The chamber was hidden behind a wall of reinforced steel, deep in the west wing, accessible only through a sequence of keys codes and biometric scans. Few had ever stepped inside, and those who did rarely spoke of it. That night, a single light burned within, casting long shadows across shelves stacked with sealed files bound in red tape. A man in a dark suit stood at the center of the room, his hands resting on the edge of a heavy table. His eyes were fixed on a single folder lying open before him. He had been part of operations. The public would never know about missions that bent laws and erased borders. Yet the document before him carried no operational codes, no military jargon. It was a transcript dated decades earlier, detailing a meeting between past leaders and a figure described only as the witness. The words were plain, almost conversational, but their meaning unsettled him. The witness had spoken of a day when a voice would move through the heart of power, not to overthrow, but to reveal, and that those in its path would be given a choice to stand or to hide. The man read the lines again, stopping at one that felt aimed directly at him. The truth will not come through force, but through the one who bears the light. His throat tightened as he realized why the file had been pulled that night. This was not a briefing. This was a reminder, one meant for him alone. From the far corner of the room came a faint sound, like fingers brushing against the metal wall. He turned sharply, but found only stillness. The light above him flickered, and for an instant the shadows formed the outline of a figure watching from the doorway. He blinked, and it was gone. Yet the sense of being observed remained pressing at the edges of his thoughts. He closed the folder and locked it back into the cabinet, sealing it with the same codes he had used countless times before. But when he stepped out of the chamber, the air in the corridor felt altered, heavier with a quiet expectancy. He did not look back, though he knew that what he had read would not fade. It would follow him until the moment came when the choice described in those pages stood before him, in the light. It began with a single chime from the clock tower on the far edge of the city, the sound carrying over rooftops in the stillness before dawn. No one thought much of it until the second chime followed, then a third, then a fourth, each louder than the last. The bells were not on any schedule. They were programmed to toll only at set hours, yet now they rang in a slow, deliberate rhythm. The sound rolled through empty streets over silent parks and into the narrow corridors of government buildings, where night staff paused mid-task to listen. In the cathedral near the center of the city, the great bronze bells joined in without a hand pulling their ropes. Each swing sent a tremor through the stone walls, dust drifting down from the rafters as though the structure itself were waking. People nearby reported feeling the vibrations in their bones, the sound bypassing their ears to strike something deeper within. Across the river, smaller churches answered one by one, until the air was thick with overlapping tones. Some rang in harmony, others in dissonance. Yet together, they formed a pattern too precise to be random. The sound carried a strange clarity, traveling further than physics should have allowed, reaching neighborhoods miles away. An elderly caretaker at one of the oldest chapels stepped outside his coat, barely pulled over his shoulders. He had tended those bells for 40 years, never once hearing them move without cause. Yet, as he watched the ropes sway on their own, he felt no fear, only recognition. He mouthed words from memory. "Behold, he stands at the door and knocks." The phrase left his lips like a reflex, as if he had been waiting all this time to say it aloud. By the time the sun began to rise, the bells had not stopped. Their rhythm slowed, but did not cease, the final notes lingering in the air long after each swing. The sound settled over the city like a mantle, and those who had heard it knew it was not a call that could be ignored. Somewhere in the unseen spaces between the echoes, something was moving closer, drawn by the fact that its arrival had already been announced. The city had fallen into an unnatural stillness by nightfall, as though the air itself knew to wait. Street lamps glowed with a muted hue, casting pale circles on the empty sidewalks. The wind had gone silent. No rustle of leaves, no hum of distant traffic. From the highest windows of the Capitol to the narrowest alley in Georgetown, there was a sense that something stood just beyond the veil, ready but unseen. In an observation room high above the city, a single operative monitored a bank of screens, each displaying feeds from points across the Capitol. The images showed no movement, yet the audio channels carried faint disturbances, static threaded with low tones, fragments of breathless syllables that the systems could not translate. Each time the volume was raised, the sound retreated like a tide, only to return softer, more deliberate. At precisely 2 minutes past midnight, every channel went dark, replaced by a uniform gray shimmer. It lasted 3 seconds before the sound came. A whisper so quiet, it seemed impossible that it could carry. Yet, it reached every ear in the room simultaneously. No one could agree on the exact words heard yet. All shared the same impression. It was not a warning, not a threat, but a statement of arrival. Outside in the deserted streets, shadows lengthened without a source. The air thickened, and faint pulses of light moved high above the skyline, barely visible to the human eye. Each pulse matched the rhythm of the whisper, as if the city itself had begun to breathe in time with it. In the Lincoln Memorial, a single candle flickered in the darkness. Though no one had lit it, its flame bent toward the statue as though drawn to an unseen presence. Footsteps echoed across the marble. Though the chamber stood empty, the sound grew louder, then softer, as if circling the space before fading into the silence once more. By the time the whisper ended, the air carried a taste of rain, though no clouds marked the sky. The operative leaned back in his chair, heart pounding without reason. Around him, the equipment returned to normal, yet the room felt altered. The whisper had left something behind. Not in the machines, but in the people who heard it. A certainty that the stillness would not last, and that the first drop of the storm was already falling somewhere unseen.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.